Despite the absence of Fairfax, trial preparations continue. But when another commissioner voices deep reservations about the legality of a trial, Cromwell snaps. This letter from Algernon Sidney recalls a furious exchange with Cromwell. Although a staunch Republican, Sidney is vehemently opposed to the trial. He tells Cromwell that the trial is not legal, firstly, because the king could be tried by no court, and secondly, that no man could be tried by that court. Cromwell is outraged. He responds with much heat, "But I tell you, we shall cut off his head with the crown upon it." In hindsight, it's tempting to see great portent in Cromwell's outburst. After all, we know how this ends. But at the time, nobody knew if this was a revelation of policy or just a flash of temper. Perhaps not even Cromwell.
Cromwell is a born negotiator, both in his military and his political career. And the trial of the king is a further negotiation as to what the king becomes. It's been called bargaining with menaces.
I think that Cromwell would rather that Charles submitted to the court. It would have made life a great deal easier. That was definitely the preferred option. But Cromwell was prepared to cut off Charles's head if he did not submit to the court.
With 9 days until the trial, Parliament is divided. The king's fate hangs in the balance. The remaining commissioners are still battling to pull together their case against the monarch. And if anyone is seriously thinking of freeing Charles, they really should get a move on. With the trial of the king the principal topic of conversation, his subjects are hungry for news. But news can be dangerous. Since the war began, there's been an explosion in press activity, a vast increase in the number of publications flying off the London presses for distribution around the country. And thanks to this continuous flow of newsbooks and pamphlets, ordinary people now have access to information, misinformation, and propaganda from both sides. In the battle between royalists and parliamentarians, the printing press has become a political weapon. In the 1640s and 50s, London bookseller George Thomason bought weekly pamphlets, broadsides and newsbooks and bound them into 2,000 volumes. Seeing them together at the British Library, you get a sense of this media explosion. Do you have a sense that as we move towards the period of Charles's trial, that there's a propaganda war being fought in the press?
Absolutely. The propaganda war continues, and we can see it in some of the volumes in front of us.
There would have been people all over the country who were reading this material.
Yes, though literacy is much higher in London than elsewhere. Within London, there's a large community of men who can read, perhaps as many as 60 or 70% of the population of some degree.
Let's start with this one, the moderate.
The moderate is aligned with the levellers.
Procrastination in peril is the mother of ensuing misery, and delays oftentimes bring to pass that he which should have died kills him which should have lived.
Yeah, he's being very circumlocucious.
It's not a catchy headline, is it? It's quite abstruse.
Then it reproduces a letter from Windsor Castle that's quite unsympathetic to the king.
We find his discourse of late very effeminate and talking much of women, which he is sure for the most part to bring in at the end of every subject.
And I think this is part of an attempt to kind of suggest both his frivolousness, but also perhaps his susceptibility to influence by his wife, the Catholic Queen.
Moving on to this one. So this has a much more grand title. So here we have Mercurius Pragmaticus, communicating intelligence from all parts, touching all affairs, designs, humours and conditions throughout the kingdom. That's a fairly broad brief, isn't it?
And as you can see, it kind of begins with a poem.
So that's another contrast. Here we have a poem, and here we have, yes, a very prosaic and prolix introduction. So the Royalists had poems.
Yes, but not because the poems represent kind of elite culture or fine art. They're dirty, they're nasty.
So what were these poems like?
Shall I read an example?
Please.
The falsehood, having won the day, now may boldly wear the light. When poor truth must sneak away, slyly skulking in the night. Yet, to have eyes by night, you'll find is better than by day be blind.
It doesn't really pull any punches, does it? I mean, it's accusatory, it's graphic. The idea that truth has been the victim in this process is very clearly stated.
Yes, it's effective, not least because it sort of posits the parliamentarian position as one of blindness.
From political scaremongering to predictions of the end of the world, both sides create a climate of fear. Against a backdrop of conflicting opinions and deep divisions, the public speculates on the king's fate. It's a war of words. Who's winning the hearts and minds of the people?
In London, what will happen is that a newspaper, a piece of propaganda will be printed. Someone will take it to the alehouse and they will read it and share it between loads and loads of people. And it won't just be men reading it. They will discuss it with their wives, and their wives will have an opinion, and their sons will have an opinion, and their daughters will have an opinion.
The king himself is entirely ignorant of these passionate debates. Since he was informed of his trial, he's heard no more. No newspapers, no letters. He doesn't know if he has the public's support. There are 8 days until the start of the trial. Neither Charles nor Cromwell really knows how the people of England will react to the coming spectacle. Today is the 3rd meeting of the High Commission appointed to try the king. Just 34 of 135 named members turn up. A new member's summoned today, a lawyer named John Bradshaw. He's given the thankless task of overseeing the commission. Whether he likes it or not, Bradshaw is appointed Lord President.
If we think about someone like Lord President John Bradshaw, a completely insignificant and unknown lawyer, he wasn't perhaps the brightest of the lawyers of the time, but he was a good common lawyer. I mean, we think about imposter syndrome, for example. Imagine that you are there, a tuppenny halfpenny magistrate from Cheshire, who is very, very reluctant to be put in this position of Lord President. And trying a king, being eyeball to eyeball with the anointed, divine representative of God's will on earth.
The Royalist press have a field day, finding a new target in this aggrandised Lord President. The contemporary writer Thomas Fuller dismisses Bradshaw as a man of execrable memory, of whom nothing good is remembered.
I think initially he said he didn't want to do it because of his family. His wife in particular was worried about him.
Bradshaw makes an earnest apology for himself that he be excused the position of Lord President. To his dismay, his request is refused. Bradshaw presses his point, again emphasising his reluctance. Again, he's overruled. There's no wriggling out of it.
He was rightly frightened of the Cavaliers, who still had their pistols and their rapiers and were in London, and he was nervous, rightly so.
It's Saturday, the 13th of January, 1649. There's just 1 week to go before the trial. The commissioners fear their lives are at risk. Royalist factions could mount a terrorist attack, and Parliament is on high alert. The vaults beneath the chambers where the judges sit are searched for explosives and sealed. With the foiled plot of Guy Fawkes a recent memory, this threat is very real.
London is in lockdown. It's a huge security operation. This is the trial of a king. It's never happened before. And the people of London are in a state of great uncertainty. They're fearful, they're edgy. What is going on? Is the king going to be assassinated? Is he going to escape? Is there going to be civil war? Is there going to be invasion? I mean, what is going on? The times are entirely unprecedented and really anything could happen.
As the trial draws nearer, there are increasing concerns about how the public might react. Parliament fears supporters of the king might rise. The government shuts down London's printing presses in an attempt to silence pro-royalist voices for fear they might stir up the people. There's one piece of royalist propaganda that's particularly dangerous for Parliament. Publication is imminent when parliamentary forces raid a London printing house and destroy it. I've come to Trinity College in Cambridge to get a sense of what the fuss was all about. This is the Wren Library, home for the last 300 years to some of the most precious books in England. But what interests me is one particular volume. This is the little book that Parliament are so scared of. It's the Icon Basilicae, or Royal Portrait, of His Sacred Majesty in his solitudes and sufferings. This claims to be the spiritual autobiography of Charles I, an account of his personal feelings, his religious beliefs, and his justification for the war. Though Charles was not the author, it is accepted that the text was compiled using his own writings. It was made with the king's blessing, and it had been his intention to have it published before the trial. Touching it, the first thing that comes to mind is how tiny it is. It can easily be slipped into a pocket or hidden under a cloak. This book is contraband. It's dangerous. It's the product of a police state. Reading something like this could be very dangerous. Inside, it becomes even more insurrectionary. Hidden in this tiny volume is a frontispiece which shows King Charles I as a Christian martyr. The frontispiece is divided into 3 sections, horizontally and vertically, and each axis expresses the progress of the king towards a potential martyrdom or even sainthood. Here at the bottom, we see his earthly crown. Inside it is written the word vanitas. So this is a vanity, a thing of the world, something which is spiritually worthless. As we move up, we see that the king's right hand is on a crown of thorns, obviously linking him immediately to Christ. Inside the crown of thorns, the word gratia, grace. On the left side of the picture, some palm trees with heavy metal bells depending from them. Crescit sub pondere virtuous. Virtue increases with heaviness, or virtue increases with weight. What it's saying is that through suffering we're redeemed, through suffering we become spiritually better. So these 2 equally balanced images both suggest Christ. In the middle of the picture sits Charles in his cloak with his hand upon his collar in an attitude of submission. He's looking up at the lighted window. At the top of the picture is his eternal glorious crown. Beatum et aeternitam, grace and eternity. Although the imagery is dense and complicated, it's also very readable. And what it's setting up is the idea of Charles I as a Protestant saint.